Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever documented in Savannah, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the time you're listening to this narration. The year was 1850 when the prestigious Montgomery Plantation stood as a beacon of Southern affluence, but beneath its gleaming facade lurked unspeakable secrets. Colonel Thaddeus Montgomery, a respected state legislator with an impeccable public image, harbored desires deemed unnatural by the society he helped govern. The Montgomery estate, situated on 50 acres of prime Georgia land, represented the pinnacle of antebellum prosperity with its imposing Greek Revival mansion, expansive cotton fields, and a workforce of 73 enslaved individuals who maintained its reputation for producing the finest Sea Island cotton in the region. Legislative records from the Georgia State Archives showed Montgomery had served 3 terms in the state legislature, championing expanded property rights for wealthy landowners while publicly advocating for the natural order that placed men like himself at society's apex. Eleanor Montgomery, his wife of 15 years and daughter of the prominent Caldwell shipping family, presided over the estate's lavish social calendar, hosting seasonal balls that attracted Savannah's elite, with attendance records in her household ledgers indicating that an invitation to the Montgomery Plantation represented the highest social achievement in coastal Georgia. Yet, by early 1850, household staff began noting peculiarities in the colonel's behavior, particularly regarding Samuel, a 30-year-old enslaved man whom Montgomery had personally selected during a Charleston auction 3 years prior, specifically noting the man's literacy in the bill of sale discovered in 1977. Samuel had been immediately removed from field labor and installed in the main house as Montgomery's personal secretary, an unprecedented position that granted him private quarters adjacent to the main house, fine clothing from Montgomery's personal tailor, and exemption from physical discipline, privileges that neighboring plantation owner Jeremiah Wilkes described in correspondence as inappropriate indulgences that threaten to undermine the very foundations upon which our society rests. The Montgomery Plantation stood in dignified decay for over a century until the Savannah Historical Society purchased the property in 1976, initiating a comprehensive restoration project intended to transform the once grand estate into a museum celebrating Georgia's antebellum architecture, though the full historical significance of the site remained obscured by time and deliberate concealment. On the 17th of June 1977, during structural reinforcement of the East Wing's master study, a room that period documents identified as Colonel Montgomery's private sanctuary, restoration specialist Dr. Evelyn Mercer and her team of archaeological preservationists discovered an anomalous hollow space behind the room's ornate cherrywood wainscoting, revealed only when a worker's hammer accidentally penetrated the thin plaster wall during molding removal. According to Dr. Mercer's meticulously documented field notes, preserved in the University of Georgia archives, the hidden compartment measured approximately 18 inches square and contained a leather-bound journal with the initials T.M. embossed on its cover, alongside several items of profound intimacy. A silver pocket watch engraved with unfamiliar initials S.W., a lock of coarse black hair tied with blue silk ribbon, and 3 miniature daguerreotypes in tarnished silver frames, showing 2 men posed in unusually familiar proximity for the photographic conventions of the mid-19th century. The journal, its pages brittle and foxed with age, contained 212 handwritten entries spanning from January 1847 to October 1850, documented in an elegant script that historical handwriting expert Professor James Whitaker later confirmed belonged to Colonel Thaddeus Montgomery himself, with certain passages written in a rudimentary cipher that required 6 months of cryptographic analysis to decipher. Dr. Mercer immediately recognized the extraordinary historical value of discovering primary documentation from a plantation owner, detailing aspects of daily life typically omitted from official records, initiating emergency preservation protocols that included hermetically sealing the journal in a climate-controlled container, transporting it to the university's Advanced Conservation Laboratory, and assembling a multidisciplinary team of historians, linguists, and preservation specialists who would spend the next 18 months carefully separating the journal's delicate pages, photographing each under specialized lighting, and transcribing the faded iron gall ink text that would ultimately reveal the scandalous truth behind the Montgomery plantation's dark legacy. According to the Charleston slave auction records of March 1847, Colonel Montgomery made an unusual journey without his wife or business associates to personally select and purchase a 30-year-old enslaved man named Samuel Winters, paying the extraordinary sum of $800, nearly triple the typical price for a male field worker of similar age and physical condition. The bill of sale, preserved in the Montgomery family business ledgers, noted the exceptional mental faculties and literate capabilities of the purchased property, characteristics that would typically reduce rather than enhance an enslaved person's value due to the prevailing fear of educated blacks spreading dangerous ideas of liberty among plantation populations. Samuel's former owner, a Charleston bookbinder who had illegally taught the man to read and write to assist with his business, provided written testimony that Samuel could comprehend complex texts and possessed a near-perfect memory, qualities that apparently captivated Montgomery during a private demonstration arranged before the official auction. Upon Samuel's arrival at the Montgomery plantation on the 3rd of April 1847, documented in the estate's slave registry, the colonel immediately defied conventional plantation management by instructing his overseer, Bartholomew Haynes, to assign the new acquisition to the main house rather than the fields, a decision Haynes vehemently protested in a letter to his cousin, writing that the master has lost his senses in believing this Negro possesses qualities elevating him above his natural station. Within a fortnight, Montgomery had established Samuel as his personal secretary, providing him with appropriate attire, rudimentary writing materials, and permission to handle the colonel's personal and business correspondence, arrangements that prompted Eleanor Montgomery to write in her diary, recently discovered in her sister's family archives, that she found the intimate proximity of this strangely privileged Negro to my husband's private affairs most unsettling, particularly given Thaddeus's increasing preference for the creature's company over proper society. The situation escalated when Montgomery insisted Samuel take meals in the kitchen rather than the slave quarters, and exempted him from the regular discipline applied to other house servants, causing Eleanor to note with evident distress that my husband watches the Negro's movements with an intensity I have never witnessed in 15 years of marriage, his gaze following the servant with an interest most inappropriate for a man of his standing. Eleanor Montgomery's personal diary, discovered in 1983 among her sister Martha Caldwell's preserved correspondence, chronicles the rapid deterioration of her marriage between April 1847 and December 1849. Transforming from expressions of mild curiosity regarding her husband's new acquisition to profound suspicion and social mortification. The earliest entries mentioning Samuel maintain a detached, almost clinical tone, with Eleanor noting simply that Thaddeus has procured a literate Negro for whom he shows unusual consideration. But by August 1847, her observations grew increasingly alarmed as she documented her husband spending a fourth consecutive evening secluded in his study with the servant Samuel, claiming urgent legislative correspondence that apparently cannot be conducted during daylight hours. According to household staff testimonies collected during the 1980 Historical Society investigation, Eleanor began stationing her lady's maid Maria outside the study during these sessions, with Maria reporting hearing unusual periods of silence interrupted by hushed laughter, rather than the dictation and writing sounds one would expect from legitimate business activities. The diary entries from spring 1848 reveal Eleanor's growing social embarrassment, particularly after the annual Magnolia Society ball where, as she recounted, Thaddeus disappeared for nearly an hour, later discovered in the host's library with Samuel supposedly organizing documents. While Mrs. Harrington raised her eyebrow at me with such pitying condescension I nearly collapsed from shame. By early 1849, Eleanor's writings betray deepening distress as she documented finding a handkerchief belonging to my husband bearing a cologne never purchased for his use in Samuel's quarters during a surreptitious inspection, and noting that Thaddeus had begun rejecting her company in their marital bed, claiming exhaustion from extensive evening work that curiously coincided with Samuel's increasing privileges on the estate. The most damning evidence of Eleanor's growing certainty appears in her final diary volume, where she wrote with trembling script that, "I have become a specter in my own home, invisible to my husband, whose gaze now fixes only upon Samuel, with an intensity that confirms my most dreadful suspicions. Suspicions I dare not commit fully to paper, lest they manifest more completely in reality." Estate records from March 1849 document Colonel Montgomery's unexpected order to convert the former seed storage building, a modest structure situated merely 40 yards from the mansion's east wing, into what he termed appropriate private accommodations for Samuel, complete with a small fireplace, proper bedstead, writing desk, and personal wash basin, amenities virtually unheard of for enslaved quarters in antebellum Georgia. Plantation account books, meticulously analyzed by historian Dr. Rebecca Thornton in 1982, reveal Montgomery diverted substantial funds from planned renovations of Eleanor's sitting room to finance this construction, justifying the expenditure as necessary for the efficient management of legislative affairs requiring immediate attention regardless of hour. The decision ignited immediate controversy throughout Savannah's elite circles, with Montgomery's own business partner Jeremiah Wilkes documenting in private correspondence that the provision of such quarters, virtually adjacent to the family residence, violates every principle of proper distance between master and slave, while church records from St. John's Episcopal note 3 prominent families refusing to be seated near the Montgomerys during Easter services that spring. According to testimony from Eleanor's lady's maid collected decades later, news of this arrangement reached Eleanor's family through the inevitable pathway of servants' gossip, prompting an unannounced visit from William Caldwell, Eleanor's elder brother and managing director of Caldwell Shipping Enterprises, who reportedly confronted Montgomery in his study with such ferocity that household staff cowered in distant corners of the mansion. The Savannah Daily Republican Society column obliquely referenced the incident, noting that a prominent shipping magnate was observed departing the Montgomery estate in a state of considerable agitation, declining to participate in the luncheon evidently prepared in anticipation of his visit. William Caldwell's personal ledgers, preserved in the Caldwell Company archives, reveal his subsequent methodical investigation into Montgomery's business affairs, including commissioning private inquiries into the colonel's legislative voting record, financial investments, and personal expenditures. Actions that, according to legal historian Dr. James Harrison, demonstrated the Caldwell family's determination to gather leverage against a man they now viewed as a threat not merely to their daughter's happiness, but to their family's social standing. The leather-bound journal discovered behind the East Wing wainscoting contained entries spanning 1,847 to 1,850, with passages beginning in September 1848, shifting into an elementary substitution cipher that cryptography experts from Georgetown University deciphered in 1979, revealing increasingly explicit accounts of intimate encounters between Montgomery and Samuel that transgressed every social boundary of antebellum society. Montgomery's earliest encrypted entries betrayed profound internal conflict, with one passage from October 1848 reading, "I maintain the facade required of my station while harboring sentiments that would destroy everything I have built. Yet I find myself powerless against these urges that both disgust and compel me." By spring 1849, the journal documented regular midnight meetings in Montgomery's private study, with the colonel noting that S. initially responded with justified apprehension to my advances, until recognizing the protection and privileges my favor might provide in his precarious circumstances. Historical psychologist Dr. Amelia Richardson identified a pattern of escalating emotional dependency in Montgomery's writings, exemplified in his June 1849 entry. I find myself inventing legislative emergencies requiring his assistance late into the night, constructing elaborate falsehoods that Eleanor pretends to believe while I pretend not to notice her suspicion. Samuel's perspective emerges only through Montgomery's filtered observations, with entries suggesting the enslaved man navigated his dangerous position with calculated precision, extracting concessions including permission to read Montgomery's extensive library, exemption from physical punishment, and eventually the private quarters that caused such social scandal. A particularly revealing entry from August 1849 states, "Requested writing materials today to transcribe my dictations," though I suspect his true purpose involves documenting his own thoughts, a request I granted despite its impropriety and potential danger. University of Virginia historian Dr. Thomas Blackwell noted that the journal reveals a profound power imbalance where Samuel, despite his fundamentally unfree status, demonstrated remarkable agency in leveraging Montgomery's inappropriate attachment to improve his circumstances and potentially plan for eventual escape, as suggested by Montgomery's paranoid later entries expressing fear that S might betray our arrangement to secure his freedom. By late summer of 1849, the household staff observed a marked deterioration in Eleanor Montgomery's physical condition, with the head housekeeper Beatrice Taylor noting in her personal records that the mistress has grown alarmingly pale, her once vibrant complexion now bearing an unsettling yellowish tinge, while her formerly robust appetite has diminished to barely consuming a few spoonfuls at mealtimes. Dr. Nathaniel Prescott, the Montgomery family physician whose detailed case notes were discovered in the Georgia Medical Society archives, initially diagnosed Eleanor with nervous exhaustion and female hysteria brought about by excessive sensitivity to domestic disturbances, prescribing bed rest, laudanum tinctures, and the application of cold compresses, treatments that plantation records indicate only accelerated her decline throughout the autumn months. A series of desperate, increasingly erratic letters sent to Eleanor's younger sister Catherine Caldwell, preserved by Catherine's descendants and donated to the Savannah Historical Society in 1965, revealed Eleanor's growing conviction that her condition stemmed from deliberate poisoning rather than natural illness, with one particularly alarming passage from November 1849 stating, "I have discovered a small glass vial of white powder in Thaddeus's desk drawer, unlabeled and hidden beneath his correspondence, and I note with mounting terror that my symptoms intensify following meals prepared under Samuel's supervision, who has inexplicably gained influence in kitchen matters despite Beatrice's objections." Eleanor's suspicions extended beyond her physical ailments to include a comprehensive awareness of her husband's transgressions, evident in her final letter to Catherine dated the 18th of December 1849, where she wrote, "I have gathered sufficient evidence of Thaddeus's unnatural relations with the slave Samuel to destroy him completely, and I intend to present this evidence to Father immediately following the Christmas holiday, after which Thaddeus will face the choice between immediate divorce on my terms or complete social and professional ruination." Modern toxicology tests performed in 1985 on hair samples taken from Eleanor's exhumed remains detected elevated levels of arsenic consistent with long-term exposure, though as forensic pathologist Dr. Martin Reynolds noted, such concentrations were not uncommon in the antebellum period due to arsenic's presence in common household items, making definitive determination of intentional poisoning scientifically impossible, despite the compelling circumstantial evidence. On the 12th of January 1850, the Montgomery plantation hosted a dinner gathering of Savannah's political and social elites, ostensibly to celebrate Colonel Montgomery's appointment to the State Legislative Committee on Agricultural Affairs, an event documented in meticulous detail through the subsequent correspondence of horrified guests, particularly in the letters of Judge William Harrington's wife, Constance, whose account to her cousin in Charleston described the most mortifying social catastrophe witnessed in Savannah's polite society this decade. According to multiple consistent accounts, the evening progressed pleasantly through 4 courses until Eleanor Montgomery, appearing unnaturally animated after consuming several glasses of sherry and speaking with uncharacteristic volume, interrupted her husband's discussion of property rights by inquiring whether his passionate defense of a man's sovereign authority over his property extended to the peculiar liberties he took with certain household possessions. Constance Harrington's letter recounts the chilling silence that descended upon the dining room as Eleanor continued, her voice trembling but clear. One wonders what our esteemed legislators would think of a man who develops unnatural preferences for his property, who installs his favorite acquisition in private quarters mere steps from his own bedchamber, who neglects his marital duties while spending nights dictating correspondence requiring no paper nor ink. The catastrophic evening concluded with Montgomery forcibly escorting his wife from the dining room, claiming sudden illness, though multiple witnesses noted Eleanor's parting declaration that evidence of my husband's perversions exists in abundance, which interested parties might discover with minimal investigation. Plantation records show that following this incident, Montgomery immediately restricted Eleanor to her bedchamber under the pretense of mental infirmity, dismissing her lady's maid, Maria, who had served as Eleanor's confidant, and replacing her with Agnes, a house slave known for her loyalty to the master. Simultaneously, Montgomery's journal entries reveal his panicked decision to increase Samuel's privileges significantly, granting him unprecedented freedom of movement on the estate and the extraordinary permission to dine in the kitchen rather than his quarters. Concessions that Overseer Bartholomew Haynes documented with evident disgust in a letter to neighboring plantation manager Isaac Miller as the final abandonment of proper order, threatening not merely this household, but the foundation upon which our entire society depends. In 1982, during the comprehensive cataloging of artifacts recovered from the former slave quarters, preservation specialist Dr. Marcus Johnson discovered a series of seemingly innocuous scraps of paper concealed within the soles of a pair of worn shoes authenticated as belonging to Samuel, revealing through ultraviolet examination faint messages written in a homemade invisible ink derived from lemon juice and ash. These hidden communications, addressed to an individual identified only as J at the neighboring Wilkinson plantation, portrayed a starkly different perspective on Samuel's relationship with Montgomery than that suggested by the Colonel's journal, with one fragment dated September 1849 reading, "The master's unnatural obsession provides opportunity, though it fills me with revulsion. I endure his attentions only to secure advantages necessary for our ultimate purpose." Linguistic analysis by Dr. Amelia Carter revealed that Samuel employed a sophisticated code-switching technique, using formal, deferential language when describing interactions with Montgomery that might be intercepted by plantation authorities, while shifting to more authentic expression when addressing fellow enslaved individuals. Particularly revealing was a message from November 1849 stating, "The mistress suspects and grows ill. Whether by her own hand or another's remains unclear. But her deterioration accelerates my timeline as her discovery threatens all." Most significant among the recovered writings was a partial map of Savannah's waterfront, with annotated locations corresponding to known safe houses operated by the city's clandestine network of freed blacks who assisted escape attempts, along with a notation regarding a northern-bound vessel scheduled for February departure. This evidence aligned with testimony provided in 1853 by Jeremiah Williams, a freed black stevedore arrested for aiding escaped slaves, who mentioned during his interrogation, documented in court transcripts, that he had arranged passage for an educated Negro man from a prominent plantation, whose escape was ultimately prevented by unexpected deaths, throwing the household into chaos. Forensic document specialist Dr. Helena Morrison concluded that Samuel's writings demonstrate remarkable psychological acuity in manipulating Montgomery's inappropriate attachment, while simultaneously maintaining connections with underground resistance networks, revealing a man playing an exceptionally dangerous game of survival and planned liberation that required navigating the violent jealousies and power dynamics of the plantation household. Following the disastrous dinner party of January 1850, Eleanor Montgomery's health deteriorated with alarming rapidity. Her condition documented in excruciating detail through Dr. Nathaniel Prescott's medical journal discovered among his personal effects in 1973, revealing symptoms alarmingly consistent with chronic arsenic exposure, persistent gastrointestinal distress, progressive weakening of the extremities, alarming hair loss, and the appearance of distinctive raindrop-like pigmentation across her hands and torso. The physician's notes from February 18th express growing professional concern, stating, "Mrs. Montgomery's condition defies conventional explanation, with symptoms suggesting mineral poisoning rather than natural disease. A suspicion I hesitate to document officially without irrefutable evidence, given the grave implications for a family of such standing." Household staff testimonies collected decades later recount Eleanor's desperate attempts to refuse food prepared in the main kitchen, insisting on meals served directly from her sister Catherine during brief, supervised visits permitted by the Colonel, requests that Montgomery consistently denied as further evidence of her mental infirmity. Montgomery's journal entries during this period display a chilling detachment from his wife's suffering, with one particularly damning passage from March 1850 reading, "E. continues her theatrical displays of illness, though Dr. Prescott assures me privately that women of nervous disposition often manufacture physical symptoms when faced with unpleasant domestic realities they wish to escape." The final consultation between Dr. Prescott and Montgomery occurred on April 3rd, documented in both the physician's records and the plantation account books, where Prescott apparently suggested consulting a specialist from Charleston, a recommendation Montgomery vehemently rejected according to the doctor's personal notes, which include the disturbing observation, "The Colonel exhibited unusual agitation at my suggestion of external consultation, declaring that a husband alone must determine appropriate care for his wife, a sentiment that, given the circumstances, provokes my gravest misgivings." Eleanor's lady's maid Agnes later testified to the Caldwell family that during the last week of April, Montgomery prohibited all visitors from entering his wife's chambers except himself and Samuel, who inexplicably delivered her evening tea personally despite such tasks typically falling well beneath his elevated station in the household hierarchy. Eleanor Montgomery died on the 29th of April 1850, with the official death certificate signed by County Medical Examiner Dr. Horace Wilson, rather than the family physician Dr. Prescott, listing the cause as natural female ailments exacerbated by nervous disposition, a vague designation that raised immediate suspicions among the Caldwell family, yet effectively prevented any further medical turns. Inquiry. According to Savannah courthouse records examined by legal historian Patricia Edmonds, Colonel Montgomery leveraged his considerable influence with Judge Thomas Blackwell, a longtime political ally whose successful election campaign had received substantial Montgomery financing, to expedite burial proceedings and deny the Caldwell family's formal request for an independent examination of the body. The Savannah Daily Republican's obituary on May 1st noted with poorly concealed surprise that Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell Montgomery, wife of the distinguished Colonel Thaddeus Montgomery and daughter of the estimable Caldwell shipping family, was laid to rest mere 36 hours following her untimely passing, in a ceremony notable for its modest arrangements and abbreviated service. Eleanor's brother, William Caldwell, documented his outrage in personal correspondence to his business associate in Charleston, writing that Montgomery has orchestrated a shameful burial befitting a servant rather than a woman of Eleanor's standing. No public viewing, a closed casket of suspiciously inexpensive construction, and a service lasting barely 20 minutes before hasty interment in the family plot. Most shocking to Savannah society was Montgomery's flagrant disregard for appropriate mourning customs. While convention demanded a minimum one-year period of solemn reflection and social withdrawal, plantation records indicate Montgomery resumed entertaining political associates in his home within a fortnight of Eleanor's burial, while personal correspondence from Constance Harrington to her sister remarked with evident horror that the bereaved husband has been observed in town wearing light-colored waistcoats, barely 3 weeks after consigning his wife to the earth. his demeanor suggesting relief rather than grief. With Eleanor's constraining presence removed, Colonel Montgomery's behavior grew increasingly reckless throughout the summer of 1850, as evidenced by multiple independent accounts documenting his flagrant disregard for social conventions governing master-slave relationships. Legislative attendance records from the Georgia state capitol reveal that Montgomery began bringing Samuel to Atlanta during the June special session, introducing him as his personal manservant while providing accommodations in his own hotel suite rather than the separate quarters typically allocated for enslaved attendants. Savannah dressmaker Abigail Winters noted in her business ledger that Montgomery commissioned fine linen shirts and a tailored waistcoat for Samuel in July, utilizing fabric originally purchased for his own wardrobe, an extraordinary transgression of class boundaries that prompted Winters to record that the colonel appears to have lost all sense of proper distinction between himself and his property. Most shocking to the plantation community was Montgomery's decision to gift Samuel with his late wife's rosewood writing desk and personal silver inkwell, items traditionally preserved for blood relations, with overseer Bartholomew Haynes documenting his objection in a letter to the colonel's cousin. The Negro now possesses finer possessions than many white men of good standing, creating dangerous notions among the remaining slaves, who naturally question why one of their kind merits such inexplicable favor. The most disturbing evidence of Montgomery's deteriorating judgment appears in his journal. Entries from August 1850, where increasingly erratic handwriting details elaborate plans to establish Samuel permanently in a private cottage at the edge of the estate grounds with unprecedented legal protections. One particularly delusional passage states, "I have consulted discreetly with Judge Harrington regarding the possibility of creating specialized manumission papers that would grant S. nominal freedom while legally binding him to this property in perpetuity, ensuring our arrangement might continue without societal interference." Montgomery's cousin, Thomas Montgomery, visiting the plantation in early September, wrote to his wife of his alarming observations. "Thaddeus has transformed beyond recognition, permitting the slave Samuel liberties that defy comprehension, allowing him to dine at the same table, addressing him without proper formality, and most disturbingly, I observed them sharing confidences with a physical familiarity that no gentleman would permit with anyone of African descent." In the aftermath of Eleanor's suspicious death and inadequate funeral, William Caldwell initiated a methodical campaign against his brother-in-law that transcended mere familial vengeance, as revealed through business ledgers and private correspondence preserved in the Caldwell Company archives. Financial records dated May 1850 document substantial payments to Pinkerton Detective Agency operative Thomas Reynolds, who, according to his recovered surveillance reports, established himself as a visiting cotton broker to infiltrate Montgomery's business circle and document the colonel's increasingly public improprieties with Samuel. Reynolds' meticulous observations, preserved in the Caldwell family papers, noted that the subject demonstrates alarming indiscretion, allowing the enslaved man to handle financial transactions in public establishments and addressing him with a familiarity reserved for social equals, while also documenting that, when inebriated, the colonel speaks of his male servant with language typically reserved for romantic attachment. Simultaneously, Caldwell leveraged his considerable shipping industry connections to investigate Montgomery's legislative activities, uncovering evidence of substantial bribes accepted from northern textile manufacturers seeking favorable cotton tariffs. Financial improprieties, documented in a series of coded letters discovered in a hidden compartment of Despactig, Caldwell's desk following his death in 1873. Most damning was Caldwell's strategic alliance with Judge Arthur Harrington, Eleanor's godfather and a prominent legal authority harboring long-standing suspicions about Montgomery's character, who provided access to sealed legislative records revealing Montgomery had redirected state funds intended for public infrastructure to projects directly benefiting his plantation holdings. The culmination of Caldwell's investigation appears in a letter dated the 28th of September, 1850, addressed to his family attorney Jonathan Pierce, stating, "I have accumulated sufficient evidence of both moral depravity and financial malfeasance to destroy Montgomery completely, with testimonies from 16 credible witnesses regarding his unnatural relations with the slave Samuel, alongside documented proof of legislative corruption that would result in immediate imprisonment if presented to appropriate authorities." Caldwell concluded this communication with the ominous declaration that justice for my sister requires complete ruination rather than mere exposure, and I intend to present Montgomery with evidence of his crimes on October 4th, offering him the choice between immediate transfer of all property to Eleanor's estate or public disgrace followed by criminal prosecution. On the 5th of October 1850, merely one day after William Caldwell's planned confrontation, Colonel Thaddeus Montgomery was discovered unconscious in his study by house servant Agnes, dying without regaining awareness several hours later, despite Dr. Prescott's intervention, an event reported in the Savannah Daily Republican under the headline, "Prominent Legislator, Felled by Apoplexy," with the article noting that the distinguished colonel appeared in excellent spirits at dinner before retiring to his study with urgent correspondence. Conspicuously absent from any public record was acknowledgement of Samuel's death, occurring just 3 days later, documented only in the plantation's slave registry with the clinical notation, "Property loss, male servant, natural causes," though household staff testimonies collected by the Historical Society in 1979 revealed that Samuel had been discovered in his private quarters displaying symptoms remarkably similar to Montgomery's: violent stomach distress followed by respiratory failure and paralysis. The subsequent investigation by the Caldwell family was abruptly terminated when William Caldwell received correspondence from Judge Harrington advising that pursuing this matter further would inevitably expose Eleanor's connection to circumstances best left buried with the deceased, suggesting the possibility of Eleanor's involvement in Montgomery's demise, though lacking conclusive evidence. In 1980, forensic pathologist Dr. Martin Reynolds conducted analysis of preserved hair samples from all 3 individuals: Eleanor's from a locket in the Caldwell family's possession, Montgomery's from his military commemorative case, and Samuel's from the ribbon-bound lock discovered in the hidden wall compartment, revealing elevated levels of arsenic trioxide in all specimens, with particularly acute concentrations in Montgomery and Samuel, suggesting massive exposure immediately preceding death, rather than the gradual accumulation evident in Eleanor's sample. County records indicate the Caldwell family successfully petitioned for custody of Montgomery's remains for reinterment alongside Eleanor, while Samuel was buried in the unmarked slave cemetery at the plantation's edge, his connection to these events deliberately obscured from official documentation. The Savannah Medical Society Journal from November 1850 contains a cryptic entry from Dr. Prescott questioning the extraordinary coincidence of similar fatal symptoms manifesting in multiple residents of the same household within a 6-month period, though his planned investigation was abandoned following a substantial donation from the Caldwell shipping fortune to the Society's new hospital construction fund. With no direct heirs to claim the Montgomery estate, ownership passed to the Colonel's distant cousins from Virginia, Thomas and Margaret Montgomery, who arrived in November 1850 to discover a property already descending into disrepair and a social climate openly hostile to the Montgomery name. Savannah church records reveal the new owners were systematically excluded from social gatherings, with invitations to traditionally inclusive events like the annual Christmas charity ball conspicuously withheld, while business ledgers document local merchants initially refusing credit extensions typically offered to plantation owners of their standing. Archaeological excavations conducted in the 1982 uncovered evidence of extensive document destruction in the weeks following Montgomery's death, with the remains of partially burned papers discovered in both the main house fireplace and an ash pit behind Samuel's quarters, suggesting a coordinated effort to eradicate evidence of the relationship that had precipitated the estate's downfall. Thomas Montgomery's correspondence with his attorney in Richmond discovered in Virginia Historical Archives in 1992, reveals his growing desperation as the plantation's productivity declined precipitously due to his inability to secure business arrangements with neighboring landowners. Writing, "We find ourselves condemned for transgressions committed before our arrival, ostracized for a scandal whose details remain deliberately obscured by those who witnessed it." By 1853, financial records show the once prosperous estate operating at significant loss, with Thomas eventually abandoning the property to return to Virginia, selling the plantation at considerable loss to industrialist Frederick Wilson, who immediately renamed it Willow Creek to distance the property from its scandalous associations. The Montgomery family actively suppressed all connections to the Georgia branch for generations, removing references from family Bibles and correspondence, until the discovery of the hidden journal in 1977 finally revealed the complex and tragic narrative that had been deliberately erased from historical record. As Savannah Historical Society Director Dr. Catherine Williams noted in her 1985 monograph on the case, the Montgomery Samuel affair represents how the antebellum South's rigid social hierarchies created explosive consequences when transgressed, resulting in a tragic triangle of exploitation, forbidden desire, and deadly revenge that claimed 3 lives and destroyed a prominent family. A story deliberately buried by those who recognized that its exposure threatened not merely one household, but the foundational justifications of the entire plantation system they were desperately trying to preserve.